Good afternoon, everybody. I got asked several times yesterday about the B word, that we hadn't mentioned it, and so we are going to mention it in the next 10 minutes or so. So where I'd like to start is just reminding people, if they need a reminding in the room, that the transformational impact of our standards have been an enabler of trade for, well, 41 years now. So we wanted to add cross-border trade to today's agenda and consider this against the current, changeable political and economic climate. GS1 is one of the great, GS1, Freudian slip, UK is one of the great trading nations. EU membership has facilitated this links and the trade flows over many years, but the result of the Brexit referendum was a shock and has taken us on a path to leave the EU. And of course, with change comes uncertainty for us as stakeholders in a global community, but more importantly, for our members and their businesses. But let's consider GS1's purpose. It's to facilitate trade. Our globally accepted system of standards enable interoperability between trading partners, underpin supply chains, and help drive e-commerce across the world. And working with the World Customs Organizations, make customs processes more effective. As members of GS1 community, we are fundamental believers in trade. But what do our members think? So we asked them. We surveyed more than 1,000 of our members who collectively employ over 100,000 people between them to get views on the opportunities and challenges of cross-border trade. We got a clear message. They told us that the benefits of cross-border trade for businesses are more important than just increasing sales and profits. The top four they cited were enhancing their profile with new and existing clients at home, capturing emerging needs in new markets, diversifying their business, and help lower per unit costs. And for society, free trade and globalization lift people out of poverty. When we asked our members about this, only 14% disagreed. There was also consensus that it brings more jobs, higher wages, and lower prices. So export is good for business and good for trade, for the environment. So, should we be worried about protectionism? Well, Donald Trump has been advocating a new age of American protectionism in his campaign speech before he was elected. And when he was elected, he removed the transatlantic trade and investment partnerships from the White House website and denounced its specific equivalent for setting out to rape the US economy. And of course, there were Marine Le Pen attacks on trade and globalization in the race for the French presidency. Now, Marine Le Pen failed in her bid to be president, and with Mr. Trump, separating rhetoric from reality is sometimes a challenge. In our research, however, only 20% of the 1,000 we polled thought that a Trump administration would be worse than Obama's for UK-US trade, so a bit of a challenge there. Our research also shows that the governments took more than 400 discriminatory actions against foreign competitors between January and August 2016, which is 4 times higher than in 2009. What is clear is that British businesses don't agree with this tide of protectionism. Only 4% of British businesses think economic policies restraining trade between countries are a good idea. But is there trouble ahead for the UK? And this is a Banksy piece of art, which just about summarizes it, really. Brexit is the most significant economic and political event for a generation. Growth could certainly be threatened if trade, investment and labour flows decline, or if the EU tries to punish Britain for leaving by using tariffs as penalties, what our Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson called punishment beatings. He's our top diplomat, by the way. But surely that doesn't make sense. The EU needs the UK, so trade will win out. We drive German cars, we love French wine, we smell Dutch flowers, and we can't get enough Spanish fruit. So that's okay, isn't it? Trade will win out. Of the 3 in 5 British exporters polled in our survey, 3 out of 5 were worried about the politics overtaking the economics of it all. Because we're eternal optimists in the UK, we also said the vast majority, 74%, predict that cross-border trade will increase in 5 years. So gloom and doom on one side and enlightenment on the other. But what should our government focus on in Brexit negotiations? One thing from the exporters was very, 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 very clear. Curbing immigration is not important. 74% said barrier-free trade is what matters. Only 6% wanted to restrict free movement of people. British businesses want to preserve our access to the single market, even if that means paying for it. Just 1/3 of super exporters, where export is more than 50% of their turnover, said that the focus should be on cutting the taxes at home. The British government and governments across the world should stop thinking about what export can do for them and start thinking what they can do for exports. The survey was clear. They said that we should make the case for free markets over protectionism. We should show that exports are the engine of our prosperity and highlight that exporters create jobs, support other businesses and train people. 87% of our survey said that the government needs to do more to explain the benefits of free trade to the public. But what about deals outside the EU? The Anglosphere is what this is called. The US, Canada, Australia and New Zealand is becoming more important for British exporters. In 2015, 22% of our exports went to the Anglosphere, but 31% of the exporters we surveyed thought they would be exporting more into these 4 countries in 5 years' time. But of course there's e-commerce, where for the shopper, borders are largely irrelevant, and small companies and even sole traders can sell across the globe as easily as they can sell across the town that they live in. In 2016, my organisation in the UK saw our small business membership, which has a turnover of £500,000 or less, grow to 78% of the total of our overall 31,000 members. That's a rise of 20% on the previous year. And the reason that they cited was selling on marketplaces for joining. So what do our members want the government to do? 2/3 polled said we should tackle the domestic transport infrastructure as a matter of urgency. Just to give you some indication, we will struggle in the UK to deliver 225 kilometres of the high-speed rail link from Manchester to London by 2026. To put that into perspective, in that time, China will have opened 30,000 kilometres of high-speed rail. So some catching up there. 2/3 of business want the government to work towards the elimination of customs duties. 62% want the government to lower corporation tax to 12.5%, similar to Ireland. 3 in every 5 want the government to provide better access to export financing for SMEs, and 58% said that the government should introduce export credits, tax credits. Finally, and it's that man again, Boris Johnson, we should reduce the regulatory red tape. Almost 50% agree with Boris Johnson that the UK should take a and I quote, "a machete of freedom to the brambles of EU regulation," unquote. So what have we learnt from this? That British businesses want the government to be practical and proactive. Don't leave them to get on with the job and assume that they will fix it themselves. That exporters are reasonably confident of success, but they need help. And there's a perceived threat from cross-border trade from protectionism. That Britain needs our agenda for export to address the demands of our exports. And finally, if you want to know more, if you haven't picked this up already, you can pick this the report up from our registration desk. But I'll leave you with one thing. GS1 has been working over 40 years to facilitate cross-border trade. Now we wish to defend it. Thank you for listening.